Hello everyone and welcome to chapter 36. So I'm going to try to breeze through these chapters. I'm not going to go through all the slides. There's like 50 slides with each chapter and there's 6 chapters or something. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but we're going to talk about a couple of different things and in setting up small businesses and franchise. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. There's a lot of different ways to do this. The sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation, and all of them are there as options. And the reality of it is all of them are there depending on the size of the business, the complexity of the business, and they're there to protect you legally. That's why they exist. So it's not necessarily, well, the sole proprietorship is you, but the other ones are there to protect you legally and offer some protections for a number of different reasons. I'll get to that in a minute. So what this slide says is most businesses begin with one person with an idea. It's a sole proprietorship, and then they move on to something. They move on to a limited partnership or a limited liability partnership or a limited liability company or a corporation. So the reality is I myself own parts of two LLCs, limited liability corporations. And like I said, I would talk about this because what it does is makes now the corporation liable for any mistakes we make as a company and not me personally. So if the corporation screws up or goes under or takes out loans, we do it as the corporation, not as me personally. So if the corporation goes under, they take the corporation's assets, not mine. If I get sued because I did something wrong, the corporation gets sued, not me. So they can have the business, they can't have my house unless I'm like willfully negligent or whatever. For the most part, it's there to provide protections for you and allow you, like corporations are considered basically a person in the law. So a person can then go out and take out loans and do stuff. So like, let's say I had terrible credit. I don't, but let's say I do. I could start a limited liability corporation, and that corporation now has zero credit background, which is better than my terrible credit. And I could start taking out loans as a business to build my business. So sometimes that's why businesses will start as corporations. But let's say you wanted to start a new business selling, I don't know, popsicles. Doesn't matter. And someone comes in the business, it's raining out, they slip and fall in your store. You had a mat down, you had a don't trip or slippery when wet sign up, whatever. You did all the things you're supposed to. Can that person still sue the store? Yeah. But they can't sue you personally. So they sue the store. So, you know, they can take the store's assets if you're found to be wrong. In that case, you wouldn't be, but probably. You know, it's one of those things. So that's why these different types of small businesses and partnerships get set up. The rest of it pretty straightforward. So we'll move on to the next chapter. So chapter 37, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's about partnerships, right? And a partnership is when more than one person partners up, they get together to do something. And then there are different rules and laws that pertain to that. Again, this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to pause the video and see if I want to talk about any of these things in particular. No, I'm good. I think the book does a great job of looking at these and describing these. If you have any questions about that, let me know though. Make sure you read the chapter well. It can get nitpicky at times. But really, this is just about how a couple people get together and create something as a whole, or sometimes it's used to determine if a partnership existed, even though like legally you didn't. Like, let's say two people got together, started a business, they never put any paperwork to it, and then there's a falling out. So then the courts have to decide how that partnership really happened. So anyway, it's an important chapter, but it's pretty straightforward. Chapter 38 is about limited liability companies and corporations. This is what I talked about. It's a hybrid form where basically we're making the business a corporation. We're incorporating behind something so that business becomes an entity unto itself. It's easy to set up an LLC. You can do it on many websites for $100 or $200. You register it with the state, and bam, you have a business. You're then responsible for filing taxes and other things, so don't just do it for the fun of it. But if you wanted to set up your own business, you can. It's very easy to do. I know people who own rental properties, who each rental property is its own LLC. That way, if something happens, it won't impact the other rental properties. So they're there. They're an important people often see LLCs as like hiding behind a corporation, hiding behind the law. But this is how the business world is set up and how it works. You know, it's one of those things. Most businesses fail, by the way. I don't know the exact number, but most businesses started failing. I mean, most of the businesses started will fail, more than 50%. Like restaurants, I think it's like something like 70% of restaurants will fail within the first 5 years. And so LLCs are set up to protect that person, to give them the option, to the ability to try to go make something, to build a business, to build a career, without putting everything they personally own and ever worked for on the line. That encourages people to go out and try to start new things and new businesses. That's the idea behind them. Whether that you can argue that people are hiding behind the law, yeah, you probably can. And are there people that do this? Sure. But it has a good intent. So, questions about that, please let me know. All right, so chapter 39 is about corporate formation and corporate financing, right? So, like I said earlier, corporations and sometimes LLCs are seen as an artificial being. They're seen as a person. They are what they are. This is how the government sees them. That way, you can treat them as a thing, right? If it wasn't set up as like a person, who do you sue? Right, so you can sue a corporation. The corporation has to send representation. If they didn't treat it as a person, then like nobody would have to come to court. So, yeah, it's interesting, and it's a weird spot in the law. Most companies or most countries have some very similar wording about this. And then depending on states, how this happens varies a little bit. And there are some states that it's more advantageous to start businesses in. Delaware being one of them. If you look at, like, if you have a credit card, look at where that bill comes from. It's almost always Delaware because of the way that their corporate laws are set up. And it brings a lot of business to Delaware. Other places aren't real happy with Delaware because they think that some of the laws in Delaware are a little bit too lax and give advantages to the businesses that they shouldn't have, and can kind of put the screws to the consumer. But, it's how it's set up. I'm not going to argue right or wrong. I'm just going to tell you how it is. So what's interesting about corporations, like I said, it's recognized in the law as an artificial person, which means it has the same rights. They have rights to due process, free speech, unreasonable searches and seizures. All those things exist for the corporation. Who and what makes up a corporation? That's the corporate personnel, the shareholders, the board of directors. And again, I think you can read through all of this chapter pretty easily, pretty straightforward. If you have questions about it, please let me know. So chapter 40 talks about the corporate directors, officers, and shareholders, each of their roles. Move my head run there. There we go. So what is the different role? And that's important to understand, right? So the board of directors is the ultimate authority in every corporation. Barton College, we have a board of trustees. There are board of directors. It's the same thing, and they're the ones responsible for all the policy decision making as necessary. So they select and remove the corporate officers, right? The board hires the president of Barton College. They hire most of the officers. Like even my contract as a professor comes from the board of directors, not necessarily from the president. Although the president is the one who is making the day-to-day decisions, and he's going to be an officer. So that happens. How do people get elected to the board of directors? Well, it depends. Each board or each company has its own rules about this. Sometimes they're elected by shareholders, sometimes they're appointed. It just depends on how it was set up. Usually the board of directors, they're on 1-year terms. And people can be on boards of businesses they know nothing about. It's really interesting to see who's on boards of directors sometimes. In the case of Barton, most of our board of directors have close ties to Barton. But if you look at like some big giant corporations, they'll have people on there that are sometimes experts in a particular area, maybe not the area that they're in, or they're there to bring publicity and press to the company they're in, because I'm on this board of directors and now it looks good to the public, so that's why they're there. There are a number of reasons that people are on the board of directors. Often people they think it's a great honor to be on a board of directors, and it is. However, because you're legally responsible for all these decisions, if you don't take that relationship seriously, that's where you can get yourself in trouble, and sometimes it can cause perception problems. That was the whole deal with Joe Biden's son, Hunter, I believe, was on a board of directors for a Ukrainian gas company. Whether he did anything right or wrong, I have no idea. All I know is because his dad was vice president and we weren't having the best of relations with Ukraine at the time, there were some things going on. It can look bad to some people. So you do have to be careful about who's on a board and why they're there. So compensation of directors is really interesting. The board of directors, sometimes they get paid, sometimes they don't. It just depends on the company, the size. I don't believe our board of directors get paid here at Barton College. They do it because they love the college and want to be part of it and help it grow. Other places, they pay the board of directors because they're helping make some big decisions. I'm sure the board of directors of ExxonMobil are all well compensated because they're dealing with what is one of the world's largest companies, and there are literally millions of jobs on the line when they make some of those decisions. So they need to put in the time and effort. Like, it's probably a full-time job to be on the board of directors of a lot of these big companies. And yeah, I'm flipping through the slides over here. The rest of it, pretty straightforward. I think you can understand what everyone does. What are their roles? What's interesting, the one thing, let me talk about this. The role of shareholders, depending on how big a share of a company you may have a big role or not. I own 10 shares of some weird little stocks. I have no role. Like, I get a little thing that says I have to vote in some things because shareholders vote for some policies. My 10 shares don't amount to a hill of beans. They're there for fun, maybe to make a little bit of money with, but otherwise not. If I'm a 40% shareholder, my stake in this company changes and my role changes because I can greatly influence it based on on voting and other things because I own 40% of a company. So it's pretty interesting. Most big companies have votes and meetings, and you'll get invited to these even if you own just a little bit of stock. You can go if you want. You don't have to. One of those things. I said, I'm not going to go to a company that I own 10 shares of stock because, like, it's a waste of my time, right? I'm not going to be able to influence anything. But it's kind of interesting. Anyway, let's move on to the next chapter. All right, so chapter 41, I'm not going to say much about because I'm going to put up the discussion question, which is really an ethics question about mergers and takeovers. But what is a merger? A merger is basically when two people get together and they say, hey, let's make our two companies into one company. That's a merger. What's left is the continuing corporation. A takeover is when company buys usually buys or sometimes awarded in court. Like, I worked for a company that we may have, I still don't know if we did or not, may have infringed on a company's patent. They sued. The courts awarded more than our company's value, so that our company just became part of that company. They just took over our company and fired all of us. But that's how it happens sometimes. So there's hostile takeovers and then not hostile takeovers. But it's pretty straightforward, right? Merger, decide to do it together. Takeover, one gets taken over. And then chapter 42, which is in insider trading, what's often called white collar crimes. And so people ask all the time, why is it a white collar crime or a blue collar crime? So this goes back to the olden days. Think of bankers. They all wore white shirts with white collars. And then the person who worked, and we still see this in the fire department, the person who works the front lines, they wear a blue shirt with a blue collar. So they're a blue collar worker. So like in the fire service, all the officers wear white shirts. All of the firefighters and engineers, by rank, they wear blue shirts. Yeah. So white collar crimes were considered being done by the people who were kind of in finance or higher up the chain. They weren't. They're not violent crimes. They're usually almost always financial crimes. But anyway, so this is a pretty important chapter. So I'm going to post another video about this one, and we'll go from there. All right. Let me know if you have any questions.